The comms were cluttered with crosstalk. Two officers argued about wind drift. Another watched the wrong grid. Target acquisition had stalled for 8 minutes. No one said it. But the strike window was closing. She wasn't on the roster. She wasn't invited to the brief. She stayed near the back. Headset on. Quiet. One screen flickered just once. She adjusted the gain manually, found the pulse buried under noise, and marked it. No one looked at her. But the call changed. The angle shifted. The target lit, and the mission moved forward because she had already seen what they hadn't. Smoke crept down the hallway like spilled ink. Soft at the edges, but thick enough to coat her teeth. Somewhere above the eastern wing, a steel beam gave way with a muted groan, followed by the muted crack of shifting concrete. The compound was coming down, piece by piece. She stepped sideways into the prep bay, blinking through the haze. One hand tight around the folded manifest in her palm. Her name was second to last. The final name below hers, Colonel Vinton, was circled in red ink. He was still inside. Someone jogged past in full gear, shouting for a comms check. Another voice, female, barked something about perimeter mines being tripped. Most of it blurred into background noise. Her focus stayed on the crate. It sat at the center of the evac bay platform like an altar. Reinforced corners, wide handles, dual biometric locks. The colonel was beside it, barking into his radio with the controlled aggression of someone who knew no one was listening. His left hand never left the crate's top handle. A young sergeant tried to speak, but Vinton cut him off with a clipped shake of the head. The crate goes, or he doesn't. That was the unspoken rule in the air. Everyone nodded. No one questioned. She didn't move toward him. Not yet. Instead, she watched from the edge of the room, where the corridor split into two. One route led toward the outer landing pad and evac marshalling zone. The other ran deeper. Past damage storage and the central archive, that wing had been sealed off when the first breach was called. And that was the problem. That was where the real intel had been logged. 2 nights earlier, she'd done a routine diagnostic on thermal backups along the lower tier and noticed something wrong in the inventory logs. The transfer timestamps didn't match 3 crates, had been rerouted for inspection, but only 2 came back online. The missing one had no flight path tag. She filed the discrepancy, but no one responded. Standard triage. They said, protocol had changed. Focus on defense and extraction. Now the colonel was treating a visibly empty container like it was the Ark of the Covenant. And no one seemed to notice. Or maybe they did. Maybe they just didn't care. She turned slightly and looked down at the manifest again. The paper was damp from her glove, creased along the middle. Her seat was in the forward left bench of evac bird 7. Wheels up in 10 minutes. Maybe less if the perimeter gave way early. She was told to prep, to wait, to stay clear of interference. The crate would be loaded with priority, followed by Colonel Vinton. Then here, then evac complete. Someone nearby was talking too fast into a headset. Another soldier asked where the flight surgeon had gone. A group of supply techs stood to the side organizing ration packs that no one would carry out. She heard one of them joke that the colonel's mystery box probably had cigars and campaign ribbons inside. The others laughed. Not one of them looked concerned. She glanced back toward the colonel. His expression hadn't changed. He kept one knee pressed against the crate's side, as if shielding it from theft. He wasn't watching the compound status board. He wasn't checking the blast reports. He was watching the crate. She exhaled once, slow and shallow, then stepped back into the corridor. The farther end of the hallway sloped down at an angle, the result of an earlier blast that had partially collapsed a side junction. Fluorescent panels flickered above her in a broken rhythm. The air smelled of burned rubber and lithium coolant. At the intersection, a fallen cabinet blocked the direct path. Beyond it was the route toward the secure archive, the vault wing. She had mapped it more than once. It was sealed now. No clearance. No access. But there were ways. She closed her eyes for a moment and pictured the layout. The back panels in the storage corridor weren't shielded. One access tunnel ran above the piping bracket near the maintenance lift, a space used by engineers when the auto-cooling system failed. It would be tight. It would be dark. But she could fit. When she opened her eyes, the hallway was shaking faintly under the weight of a second detonation in the distance. Dust drifted from the ventilation grates. A voice over the intercom called for all non-essential personnel to proceed to lockdown Zone C. She folded the manifest in half, tucking it into her lower sleeve pocket, and adjusted the strap on her chest rig. Behind her, someone called out that Bird 7 was spinning up early. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned toward the half-collapsed path leading to the vault wing. A wheeled cart had overturned in the blast, and its contents spare wiring. A sealed torch. A binder of inspection logs were strewn across the floor. She stepped over them carefully. Her boots made no sound against the scorched tile. At the end of the hall, behind the fallen cabinet, the access tunnel would still be there. She knew what the protocol said. She knew what the manifest meant. But instinct was louder now, pressing against the edge of her ribs, refusing to let her look away. The crate in the evac bay had presence. It had drama. It had rank, but it didn't have weight. She had seen decoys before. She knew how empty something could be while still being treated like gold. She reached the cabinet, crouched beside it, and placed one hand on the floor for balance. The compound trembled again. The lights flickered once more. Her breath stayed steady. Sometimes, she thought, you didn't need to be told what mattered. You just had to move before someone told you not to. And she did. The lower service corridor was darker than she remembered. The overhead strips flickered erratically, casting fractured light across cable bundles pinned to the concrete ceiling. She crouched low near the broken pipe junction where the access crawlspace began. One hand pressed against the panel for balance. Her boots shifted through wet dust and loosened grit. A nearby junction box hummed faintly, overworked from the rerouted power demands since the first outer breach. Above her, the bass vibrated again. Distant boom. Sharper now. The perimeter was no longer holding. She slid her shoulder beneath the lip of the broken panel and wriggled forward into the tunnel. Arms tucked tight. The space narrowed after the second support bracket. Her chest caught briefly on the underside of a rusted brace, and she exhaled fully to slip beneath it. Dirt and soot coated her sleeves as she moved forward. The crawl space stank of old lubricant and heat-treated wiring. Somewhere behind the wall, a backup generator cycled with a low, rhythmic rumble. She counted the number of pipe crossings by feel 3 segments to the first bend, then another 2 lengths to the cooling duct. The vault should be just beyond that. At the halfway mark, her hip caught on a length of exposed conduit. She didn't stop. She shifted her weight, scraped through, and kept going. Ignoring the sharp tug of her badge, lanyard snapping loose behind her. The ID dropped somewhere into the grime. She didn't reach for it. She had already chosen her direction. The heat thickened as she crawled. This part of the wing was fed by its own emergency system, still active. A low red glow pulsed through the floor vent beside her right shoulder. The crawl space terminated at a grated shaft cover, half dislodged by previous tremors. She twisted her body sideways and kicked once, heel against rusted bolts. The cover gave with a grating squeal and fell inward. She followed it down, landing hard on one knee in a narrow, angled utility channel. Her hands pressed to the concrete. Steadying her breath, the vault door loomed ahead, scorched but intact. Its outer keypad was dead. Display cracked. She didn't pause. To the left of the frame was an older utility hatch, non-powered, manually bolted, rarely used. She unslung her side pouch and pulled out a slim strip of metal, wedged it under the latch, and jerked once. The bolt gave. The hatch opened just enough for her to slip through. Inside the vault, the air was frigid. Not just cool, cold enough that her breath fogged once as it passed through the beam of her flashlight. The rows of sealed drawers stretched out in perfect order, their edges lit by backup LEDs still running on battery reserve. She moved directly to drawer 11, second row from the bottom. The manifest didn't show this location anymore. It had been cleared in the system 2 weeks earlier, but she'd seen the correction tag delay. She knew it hadn't been processed physically. The drawer stuck halfway out. She braced her foot on the opposite panel and pulled harder. Metal groaned. The seal cracked with a puff of preserved air. Inside was a thermal case, no larger than a shoebox. Silver gray with a triple clasp and foam-locked interior. She lifted it gently. The weight surprised her. Dense, heavy enough to matter. The cold from its casing seeped through her gloves. She adjusted the strap across her shoulder and stepped backward. One careful foot at a time. A far-off explosion echoed through the vault's outer walls, distant but close enough to vibrate the drawers. The lights flickered. She turned toward the hatch, just as the overhead comms panel hissed with static. A voice bled through the distortion, barely a full sentence before cutting out. She tapped her headset once, twice. No response. The signal was gone. Silence settled over the room like a second temperature. She glanced down at her watch. 8 minutes. That was what she had left, if the evac wasn't already gone. She pressed her back against the wall and retraced her path. At the shaft cover, she dropped the cold box down first, letting it thump gently against the angled duct. Then she lowered herself feet first, catching the side rail with both hands and sliding into the heat again. Her knees scraped the concrete. She winced, but kept moving. She pulled the intel box back onto her shoulder and crawled fast. Breath hot in her throat, sweat rising under her collar. The crawl space felt smaller now, or maybe she was moving faster than before. At the final junction, the outer corridor air returned, smoke-heavy and loud. A burst of gunfire clattered somewhere past the lower access hall. She paused near the panel, ears tuned. The shots weren't close, but not far enough to ignore. She reached the grating, kicked it once, and pushed through. She emerged into the underhall storage bay behind the old kitchen block, an area used for overflow gear. The door to the yard was 20 meters ahead, slightly ajar. Metal frame scorched along the bottom. Sunlight poured through the opening, white with dust and haze. She crossed the bay low and fast, slipping between toppled shelving and a collapsed folding table. The cold box knocked once against the frame of a tipped freezer, the sound loud in the echoing space. She didn't flinch. At the door, she crouched and scanned through the gap. Outside, the compound yard was chaos. Smoke churned in thick spirals across the open area. To the right, near the landing zone, the rotary evac was touching down. Its rotors sliced the air, kicking up a blizzard of sand and ash. Figures ran low under the downwash. Hauling crates. Guiding, wounded. Someone waved at the pilot from near the tower. Another man was shouting orders and pointing toward the evac ramp. She could just barely hear the voice, distorted by wind and fire. It wasn't the colonel. She gripped the intel case tighter and stepped back into cover, checking the approach. The path was open but exposed, 40 meters across fractured pavement and scattered debris. No shelter beyond a burned-out transport near the halfway mark. She didn't hesitate. One last look down confirmed the seal on the case was intact. Her gloves were damp from heat and dust. The noise outside intensified. The compound was folding in on itself. She didn't look back. Sometimes disobedience wasn't loud. Sometimes it just moved quietly, toward the thing no one else was willing to carry. She took one breath, adjusted the strap, and stepped through the broken door into the sun, fully exposed. With the cold intel block against her shoulder, the first shot rang out as she passed the 8-meter mark. The blast near the far fuel depot had shifted the landscape. Smoke poured across the edge of the yard, and the scent of scorched rubber hung low in the air. She moved along the inner wall of the barracks storage wing, careful to stay below the windows. Her breathing was shallow now, forced through a tightened throat, but her grip on the red-sealed intel block never wavered. The casing was cold against her arm, solid and steady, the only thing not buckling under pressure. She rounded the corner near the mess entrance and slowed just long enough to assess the yard. The helicopter was still there, rotors sweeping clouds of dust into high spirals. It hadn't lifted yet. Engines were spooling. The ramp half lowered. Rear crew shouting over the roar of wind and broken comms. To her left, a fire team was helping load the final wounded. One of them looked her way, then passed her without recognition. Her uniform was streaked with ash, and the sleeve on her right arm was torn. The evac band still wrapped but darkened with soot. She moved again, keeping her body low, knees bent. Her boot slid slightly in the mud-churned track made by earlier evac runs. She passed a row of sandbags and ducked behind the generator shed, angling toward the loading platform. The open yard between her and the evac was no longer just a path. It was a decision. The manifest had been called. Her name had been second to last. She had given that place up 30 minutes ago, and no one had noticed. She cut behind a line of stacked rations, veered left, and made for the secondary water pump enclosure. From there, she could angle to the left side of the landing ramp without crossing the full blast zone. She kept her steps tight, one hand over the strap of her shoulder rig, the other gripping the intel block against her ribs. A shout cut through the wind. Someone had seen her. She didn't stop. A soldier in half kit stepped into her path, palm raised. He wasn't pointing a weapon, just signaling to halt. His brow furrowed. He shouted again, but the rotors drowned his words. She shifted left, fast, trying to slip past. His hand caught her arm. Not hard, but firm enough to interrupt her momentum. "Ma'am, that zone's locked. You're not on this lift." She twisted free. Not violently, just fast. A practice slide of motion, weight shifting low. Arm out, shoulder through. The grip slipped. He stumbled backward and reached for his radio. She was already moving. Mud kicked up behind her boots. The cold block bounced once against her side. She didn't look back. Behind the fuel drums, she ducked. Used the incline of the uneven concrete to shield her approach. The last evac call crackled over the open net, garbled, clipped, but unmistakable. 90 seconds. The ramp was starting to lift. She reached the edge of the blast wall, crouched low, and adjusted her hold. Her gloves were damp now, not from heat, but from pressure. Her shoulder ached from the weight. She shifted her stance, eyes scanning the final 10 meters to the ramp's corner. From her position, she could see the crew chief leaning out, eyes scanning the yard. His headset was half tilted, one hand raised in signal. Just beyond him, another officer was loading gear into the rear hold. A shadow moved across the edge of the door frame, someone in command stripes. The colonel, maybe, or someone who thought like him. She stayed low, back pressed to the scorched remains of a support beam. A metal panel beside her still radiated heat from a past fire. Her torn sleeve caught on the jagged edge, ripping a small flap near the shoulder. She didn't fix it. She didn't look at the damage. Instead, she glanced down at the evac band still fastened to her wrist. It was smudged but legible. Her name, second to last. Still there, but no longer real. The engine roar deepened. The helicopter shuddered. The crew chief gave the first hand signal. She adjusted her grip on the block and shifted her feet beneath her. From the shadows, she made eye contact with the flight officer beside the door. Just for a second. He didn't recognize her, but he hesitated. Something in the mud on her face. The way she crouched. The box against her chest. He held the door a moment longer. She didn't call out. She didn't raise her hand. She moved. She broke cover with the red-sealed intel block, gripped tight against her ribs. Lungs burning, with the first full draw of open air. The ground ahead was fractured concrete and blackened tarmac. A warped patch of earth, torn up by the last shell, impact. Heat shimmer rippled above the yard, bending light around the moving rotor blades. She didn't aim for the ramp directly. She cut left. Lower angle. Trying to follow the slight dip in terrain that would at least give her shadow cover for the first few strides. A sharp snap of rifle fire cracked past her left ear. Too close to mistake for echo. She didn't stop. Her boots punched through loose gravel, kicking up dust and ash with every stride. The wind from the rotor downwash hit her at an angle, pulling sideways at her torn sleeve. Her legs moved on memory, not thought. The block shifted against her shoulder, its cold casing suddenly slick with sweat and grime. She adjusted her grip mid-stride, eyes on the rear ramp. At 20 meters, she stumbled. Not a full fall, just a sharp jolt as her foot slid across an oil-slicked patch of rubble. The intel block slammed into her ribs, and the impact jarred her enough to twist her knee. She hit the ground hard. Hands splayed out. Breath knocked from her chest. The case bounced forward into the dust. Her hearing thinned for a second. Overtaken by the roar of the rotors, she blinked through grit. Vision blurred, and saw the block 3 meters ahead. Then another shot rang out, and the concrete a foot from her shoulder cracked open in a burst of gray dust. She crawled, elbows in. Kintokt. She dragged herself forward on instinct. Her palms burned against the ground. One knee wasn't moving cleanly, but she kept pushing, her teeth clenched tight. The rotor wash turned the smoke around her into spirals of heat and shadow. She reached the block, yanked it back under her chest, and curled around it with her body angled toward the ramp. Move. 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 Someone was shouting near the helicopter. Figures darted past the edge of her vision, mostly crouched. Some carrying gear, others helping wounded. She pushed up to her feet, half limping now, and kept going. 5 meters. Then 4. The incline of the ramp pulled against her legs. A figure to her right stumbled into view, collapsing hard onto one elbow. A soldier, barely conscious. Blood streaking down the side of his vest. He was crawling, but not fast enough. Rounds hissed into the ground nearby. She veered without hesitation. She dropped to one knee beside him, grabbed the backstrap of his plate carrier, and hauled. Her bad knee screamed in protest. Her left arm locked around the block. With her right, she pulled him upright by sheer leverage, pivoting her weight and driving backward toward the ramp. He didn't speak. His face was pale, lips cracked with dust. He held on weakly, one hand slipping across the slick edge of her vest. Another figure appeared at the top of the ramp, crew chief. Headset on, arms waving. She shouted once, her voice shredded by dust and urgency. "This is the real one, don't let them lock it." He stared at her for a heartbeat, then dropped low and waved them both forward. Someone else reached down to grab the wounded man. She shoved the intel block upward. 2 hands, straight into the waiting arms of the flight officer. A crack split the air behind her. Another round. Someone shouted to lift. The crew began pulling the ramp line in. The chopper shifted as its weight balance adjusted. She pushed again. One last burst of force, and rolled herself halfway up the ramp edge. Hands grabbed her vest, dragging her clear. The heat inside the aircraft hit like a wall, dry and sharp with fuel and sweat. She collapsed onto the floor beside the sealed box, chest heaving. Around her, everything was noise. The side door slammed shut. The cabin lights flickered. The bird lifted, tilted, corrected. Voices overlapped, crew calling for counts. Someone checking the wounded. She barely registered any of it. She rolled onto her side, facing the intel box. The red seal was cracked now. A faint dent showed on the side panel, but it hadn't broken. The flight officer who had caught it was on his knees beside the gear bench, shouting updates into his GOM. She watched his expression shift as he registered what he was holding. His voice dropped. One hand covered the comm mic. His other hand remained on the box. She didn't speak. A medic crouched beside her, reaching for her shoulder. She shook her head once. Not injured enough to matter. She closed her eyes for a moment. Not from pain. Not from relief, just to center. Wind screamed against the aircraft's skin as they banked hard toward the horizon. She reached down and touched her knee. Blood soaked through the fabric. A clean cut, just above the joint. She pressed against it to keep the swelling down. She turned her head again. The officer still held the box. He was nodding now, speaking low into the headset. Behind him, one of the crew looked toward her, confused, maybe stunned. She didn't care. The helicopter climbed fast, clearing the last ridge. Below, the compound burned, black columns rising like fingers. No one had expected her. No one had called her name. She had come anyway. She sat upright, one hand braced against the floor, and stared at the sealed case. In that moment, nothing else mattered. She had made the reach, and the box had landed. The helicopter thumped hard as it leveled into cruise, engines droning, with a steadiness that felt too calm for what they had just left behind. Inside, the cabin air was hot with recycled dust and sweat. No one spoke for a moment. Helmets stayed on. Packs remained slung, half loose against the wall brackets. Even the medic who had cleaned her knee settled into silence, crouched nearby, wiping his hands on the inside of his pant leg. Near the tail ramp, the crate marked for Colonel Vinton rested untouched. It was pristine, edges sharp. The coated latch blinking blue. A flight crewman finally reached for it, hands quick, but unsure. His expression tight with confusion. He tapped the lock panel. It chimed, then clicked open. The lid came back with a metallic hiss. Inside were comm headsets. 3 pairs. Mismatched. 2 ration kits. Unsealed. A framed photo wrapped in fabric. A sealed canister of lithium cells. And a data core shell empty. No core inside. No drive. No thermocase. Just a shell. The flight crewman stared at it for a second, then glanced back toward the command row. No one said anything. He shut the lid slowly. On the floor near the bulkhead, the red-sealed intel block still sat between the medic's boots. One edge was dented, dust-streaked. The seal remained intact. Another crewman crouched beside it, pulled out a flat key tool, and carefully cracked the housing. The outer seal gave with a pop, pressure releasing from the internal compartment. Cold vapor slipped out along the edges. A soft click. As the drive activated, the onboard tech, a lieutenant, young, with dust still coating the inside of his helmet strap, knelt beside him. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Then he reached for the internal connection, slotted it into the console terminal, and waited. What came up on the screen was not background logs, not decoy signatures, not archived supply ledgers. It was high-clearance routing, satellite imagery, pulse logs, uniposition, call traces, and forward observation from 3 deep informant assets. Some of it was live-coded. None of it had been reviewed or confirmed for extraction. He didn't say anything at first. Then he pressed one hand to his headset mic and muttered, "We need to reroute this now. Confirm secure back channel. Patch in the forward relay." Someone behind him swore quietly. In the back corner, another crew member stood staring at the opened colonel's crate. Shoulders tight, jaw locked. No one looked at her. She remained near the side wall, fingers lightly pressed against the floor for balance. Her knee still throbbed, but the bleeding had slowed. The blood had already soaked through the top layer of her uniform and dried to a dull smear. Her wristband was still there, though nearly blackened now. The print was faint but visible. It read second to last. She didn't shift. She didn't cough. She didn't blink. The intel drive on the screen glowed faint blue. As the download command initiated, the tech ran a secondary encryption sweep. Another crewman clicked his tongue and muttered something about command being completely blind. Still, no one acknowledged her. She could feel it in the way their bodies angled away. Not in disrespect, but in uncertainty. They didn't know what she had done, or why, only that it had changed something. The flight officer from the ramp stood at the midsection bulkhead now, helmet off, headset hanging from one ear. His eyes found hers. Just once. He didn't speak. He didn't nod, but he looked fully, long enough to register what she was, what she carried, what had almost stayed buried. Then he turned back toward the screen. A small sound echoed through the cabin, the shift of someone rewrapping a shoulder strap, the dry click of the internal hatch resealing. The medic beside her cleared his throat. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the intel block. There were no thanks. New questions. No reprimand. Only the quiet hum of the system verifying the core's integrity. She didn't need to explain what she did. She knew it held. The logistics hub was quiet this time of day. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, dimmer than necessary, casting long shadows across the half-used floor. Most of the desks were empty, chairs tucked in neatly, screens idling with looping field diagrams or system alerts that no one had acknowledged in hours. She sat at one of the corner terminals, back straight, fingers still dusty from moving crates earlier that morning. The screen in front of her listed 6 routing requests, none urgent, none assigned directly to her. In the top right corner of the interface, a subfolder labeled Mission Logs blinked once, then settled. She opened it out of habit, not expectation. Her name appeared down the list, next to a date 6 weeks old, under the field marked Incident Leadership. The line was blank. She didn't look surprised. Outside the reinforced glass, an airstrip cut a straight path through the valley beyond. No aircraft moved. A fuel truck rolled past at low speed, somewhere off-screen. A crane shifted the outer fence line. She watched none of it. The internal announcement chime crackled, then went silent again. A stack of folders sat beside her elbow, unfiled. She didn't reach for them. Instead, she stood, slowly, knees stiff from the morning's lift work, and crossed to the narrow locker row near the wall. Her nameplate was printed wrong, spelled with a missing letter, never corrected. She opened the door and pulled down her gear bag. Inside, near the bottom, beneath a rolled flight poncho and 2 spare rations, lay the red-sealed wrapper. Just the casing now. No data core. The actual intel had been passed up the chain days ago. Scrubbed. Integrated. Buried. But she had kept the outer shell. It wasn't labeled. It didn't need to be. She turned it over once in her hand. The dent on the side was still there. Dust still clung in the seam. Her evac wristband lay folded beside it. Brittle now. The ink barely legible. The words second to last had faded into a faint curve of letters. She tucked both items back into the corner of her bag and zipped it shut. The hallway outside the locker room was even quieter. One technician passed her without looking up. Another leaned against a console, typing into a handheld, focused entirely on inventory codes. She moved past them both without drawing notice. Near the exit, a figure stepped into view. Uniform clean. Not new. Not command. A flight officer. Familiar. But not recent. He glanced her way, then slowed. His steps matched hers for a second. Then he spoke. Voice quiet. Almost an afterthought. I saw the manifest. That was all. He didn't smile. He didn't stop. She nodded once. Nothing else passed between them. Outside, the air was dry and flat. A line of clouds hung low over the ridge. Unmoving. The dirt beneath her boots cracked faintly as she crossed the tarmac. The weight of her gear light, compared to the last time she'd walked a field like this. No parade. No medal. No mention. But the seal had held, and she had carried it. When no one else did, she reached the end of the main lot, adjusted the strap across her shoulder, and stepped forward again. Her back straight, her eyes steady. Whatever came next, she was already moving toward it. She was never supposed to lead, never expected to change the outcome. Her name was second to last. Her role barely noted. Her actions almost erased. But when it mattered, when the mission began to fail, she moved without permission, carried the weight no one else saw, and made the quiet decision that turned everything. She asked for no credit, received no recognition, and still, she stood. Because some strength isn't loud. Some leadership isn't ranked. It lives in those who act. Not for praise, but because the truth demands it. She did not wait to be seen. She simply saw what needed to be done. If that resonates with you, take a moment to reflect on those around you who carry more than they show. Share your thoughts in the comments or follow for more stories of quiet, powerful resilience. Sometimes, the ones no one watches are the ones who hold the line.